So here's the pop-up quiz for today. How many thousands of people did Jesus feed miraculously? How many? More than 5? Oh, yes, you noticed the detail about the man being counted, and there's also the children and the women, as I'm sure the men were not there by themselves. But was it 4 or 5? How many thousands were mentioned? It changes is the answer. Okay, yes. Because there are actually 6 such accounts in the 4 Gospels, which means that 2 Gospels, Matthew and Mark, tell the story twice. And those are the Gospels where the numbers change from 5 to 4. And then in John and in Luke, you just have the 5. So that's why we sometimes forget just how many thousands were mentioned, and with how many loaves and baskets and all those details about the numbers. I wonder if this miracle was so important to the evangelists, like that even the nativity is told really in a great amount of detail only once in Luke. So there are supposedly more important stories and miracles told only once, and it's only the resurrection and the miraculous feeding that is told more than once, or in fact by every evangelist, and even more than once in a gospel. I think it's because we will ourselves never raise anyone from death. We will not walk on water, I guess, unless it's frozen. We will never, we might think we exorcise demons, but we don't know what is going on. But the feeding of people is something we each do regularly, and I would argue sometimes with miraculous effects on people that might exceed what we even know as we do that. So when we bring meals to people who are bereaved, or those hospitalized, or those recovering, I think we give them more than physical nourishment. When we contribute to food banks, we feed people whom we will never meet. But I'm sure that our compassion in giving touches their lives in more than just a physical way. Although the physical way, of course, is very important. It's one of our basic needs as all living creatures, is to be fed. So this miracle, even when it's just feeding, never mind multiplying food to such great numbers, and always entails the spiritual component alongside the physical one. So I suspect that's why every evangelist was drawn to this metaphor. Each of them used the story at different points in the narrative to highlight different aspects of Jesus' ministry. And so they accomplished different narrative purposes, even though all the 6 accounts are told with consistent detail. So then the question is this the same event told so many different times? Or perhaps it's done purely from a narrative point to highlight, to return to the same theme in different ways, how a preacher might return to the same illustration to mean different points? Or are those really different events in Jesus' ministry, and he's done the same thing in different contexts several times? I don't think we will know the full answer or the definite answer to this, but from the way that Mark's and Matthew's Gospels are put together, it seems that they definitely distinguish, at least between the 4 and the 5,000 fed, because of the placement in the narrative and because of all those numbers that are used in the stories that seem to point to different, to create different symbolism, which I'll tell you in a moment. And then there is also the sense that the 6 stories together across all 4 Gospels also tell a unified story, create a theological arc. So today we read from Matthew 14. This is essentially a replica of Mark 6. So it's a pair of stories that appear in the 2 synoptic Gospels, where Mark is often considered by the scholars to be the foundational account. So it seems that other evangelists had access to Mark's text and then added their information or their interpretation. So there's not much difference between Mark, first telling of Mark, and the first telling in Matthew, both of which involve 5,000 fed. And in both, these stories are told after John the Baptist is executed. And so Jesus and the disciples are grieving, they're overwhelmed. In Matthew, there is an indication that Jesus was already healing people, and so they try to gain some rest and withdraw from all those needy crowds. But the crowds follow, and Jesus has compassion on them, recognizing that they're like the sheep without a shepherd, and so he feeds them. Then, in the same 2 Gospels, Mark and Matthew, you'll find another account of the feeding of the 4,000. And that will happen later in Jesus' ministry, after he will walk on water and argue with the religious leaders and visit the Gentile areas. This is a significant detail. In 2 weeks, we will read about how a Canaanite woman, a foreigner, challenged Jesus. I love that story. I'll be back for it from my next vacation. But she was a foreigner whose daughter Jesus healed. So, in fact, there is an indication that this next pair of feeding miracles it shows how Jesus' ministry and God's grace becomes expanded. The circle of care grows larger. So you start with the Jewish audience and the Jewish people fed, those 5,000, and then you move on to the whole world, with Jesus' ministry also expanding to include foreigners in between the tellings, which is, to me, quite exciting, because that involves all of us. That shows that the physical nourishment, physical care that God extends to all of us as we live, sometimes in ways that are not noticed or known by us, also mirrors the spiritual nourishment, the eternal life that God gives to all of us, to each person. In John's Gospel, where you have only one telling of the 5,000 fed, it leads immediately into the chapter about Jesus being the bread of life. And then in Luke, it actually stands between the disciples' first missionary trip to heal and exorcise demons with no supplies. Don't take even the 2 coats, that one. And then Peter's acknowledgement of Jesus as the Messiah, the acknowledgement that Jesus is the one ultimate healer and feeder, the one who feeds the world. And so how do we get this, though, from the symbolism of the stories? That these numbers, the thousands, are not just to impress us with the scale of the miracle, but to indicate the reach of grace. Well, it's the 4 and 5 and the 12. So when you have the 5,000 fed, the scholars say those are Jewish 5,000s and more, of course, with their families, 5,000 families. Because 5 in the Jewish tradition stands for the Torah, the first 5 books traditionally attributed to Moses. And so the 12 baskets, which are also in that telling, those are the 12 tribes of Israel, the baskets of leftovers, that is, which indicates that this healing that the Torah promises, the feeding that Jesus embodies as the one who fulfills the law, extends to all of Israel, all initial 12 tribes, not just the 2 that survived all the conquests and exile, all of it. And the baskets, by the way, this is a special word that stands for the baskets that the Jewish people used, the smaller ones. And then in the second pair, the feeding of the 4,000, with the 7 baskets left over, what is 7? It's the days of creation, the number of completion, and the 7 tribes who lived in Canaan before the Jewish people came. So that 7 stands for both the whole world, non-Jewish world too, and the completeness of it. And then the 4, well, there's 4 directions. It stands for the whole earth. So you can see how from Israel, with its specific relationship with Moses and with God, Moses being the intercessor for the people, the manna came because Moses asked for provision for his people. Then you move on to the whole world, touched by grace, fed by God, ever-widening reach of which we are part. How's that for a pop-up quiz? Now, one more question. There is actually one more number that is important for us today, which is in Mark as well. And that's an unfair question because we didn't even read Mark today, we read Matthew. So that number is 1. There is a story that has 1 loaf. And that's 1 loaf of bread in the boat after the second feeding. The disciples have just seen the miracle, presumably at least twice. And they're seasoned travelers. How could they forget to pack lunches when they went in the boat? Or they also had those multiple baskets of leftovers and everything. And yet, when immediately after this second feeding is told, they depart in the boat and they worry about having only 1 loaf. How is that possible? Well, I think that's very possible for us being human. When we are distracted or worried or preoccupied or think that somebody else will take care, do the job for us, rely on somebody else, we forget to pack, to bring what we need. Forgetfulness is understandable. And even when we've seen God's provision for us, we've seen the tiny miracles in our own lives, we still worry. It's still very human. The question is, why doesn't Jesus multiply that loaf and just take care of it there and then? Instead, what he does, he starts quizzing the disciples about the numbers in the way that I just did for with us here. He says, don't you remember the baskets, the thousands? I can't remember the exact question he asked, but he gets to the numbers, which they remember, but they don't see the meaning that I just told you. Maybe understandably, because I think that kind of a realization comes to us after 2,000 of years of Christian tradition and accumulated interpretation, and in general, processing God's revelation to us, our own insights, takes time. I think eventually they got it. The disciples got it. They saw Jesus multiplying, or at least breaking the loaf 2 more times. At the Last Supper, and then at the village of Emmaus, where they recognized Jesus' resurrected presence because he broke the bread again. And so here, we have our own 1 loaf. 1 bread, 1 body is how the song goes. And the phrase is, we all share in the same bread. We being many are one body, for we share in the same bread. And that's probably the real miracle, that such a diverse crowd as we are, and as those first century people were, are able to share with those whom we actually probably never thought to invite, but God brings together. And there's always enough bread, grace. There's enough bread because Trish makes sure, or in this case, Mary made sure that we have enough little pieces. But metaphorically, spiritually, there is enough because we each bring something of ourselves and share it, because God invites us to do that. Jesus never gave bread directly to people. He is not said to have done that. He broke what people brought, and then the disciples distributed it, much like we do here. Much like Jesus' own body was broken on the cross, the self-giving of it. Basically giving of yourself what you have, Jesus epitomizes, and we still do, and that's what the miracle in the story could be. Just to conclude, because I saw Emily here, Emily once told me the story about being stranded in an airport. Remember that one? Closed. The airport was closed. The plane had to land. There was no furniture and no food court. Like, there was no food. And you had to wait the night, right? On the bare floor. Well, maybe I'm exaggerating the details now for narrative's sake, but there was nothing to eat for the next 12 hours till the next plane would come, because this one was not working. So, what happened? Did anyone go hungry? No, because everybody pulled out the goldfish that we had at the beginning. Maybe somebody else had granola bars, maybe somebody else had another snack. And when everything was pulled together, there was somehow enough. Isn't that a perfect metaphor for grace? God doesn't create it out of nothing. God gives us our gifts first, and then we share them, and that's how there is enough. In our lives, we want to count how much money, time, things, properties, cars, friends, energy, health do I have? Well, every philosophy emphasizes, like every single school of philosophy emphasizes gratitude as the center, the cornerstone of contentment. So how about, just as Jesus made the disciples count, we can count things we have from the perspective of blessing, not lack. Maybe we can count our possessions that help us enjoy hobbies and make life beautiful. Maybe our gardening tools, maybe our baking pots. Just look at the stuff we have. We have so much, and it's good. And let us organize, clean, declutter, do something with it to help us appreciate it. Our bodies, let us look and count our limbs, our strength, our skills. If we can't move without assistance, we can still move. If we cannot see well, we can use our other senses. Let's appreciate what our bodies do for us, no matter their size and look and shape and strength, and maybe talk to somebody who is more physically limited than we are, compassionately, to understand, to empathize, and to appreciate. In relationships, can we count the years spent with a person, the length of friendship, rather than maybe how many gifts were given or time spent? There's always something to appreciate about every aspect of our lives from the point of giving thanks. So I'll end with this invitation, as well as with the invitation to share the bread together today, the one loaf that we have given to all of us. Thanks be to God.